Hi, sleepy souls. Lock your doors, turn off the lights, and get comfortable. Before we start, drop a comment and let me know which part of the world you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.
A young woman named Tegan was driving home from her sister's house, a trip she'd made 100 times. But tonight, it felt different. The air was thick, heavy, like an unspoken presence pressing down on the isolated country highway. The moon offered little light. Her ancient Honda Civic rattled along the sleeping fields. Mile markers blurred into ghostly streaks as she drove deeper into the darkness. She'd left later than planned, caught up in baby photos and nostalgic chatter. Now exhaustion was a lead blanket draped over her, threatening to pull her into its suffocating embrace. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white, forcing herself to focus. The only other light on the road was her own headlights carving a tunnel through the impenetrable night. For what felt like an eternity, she was utterly alone. Then, in her rearview mirror, 2 pinpricks of light appeared. Headlights, far off but undeniably there. A sense of relief washed over her, quickly followed by a prickle of unease. Relief because she wasn't completely isolated anymore. Unease because on this road, at this hour, traffic was virtually non-existent. Who else would be out here? The lights grew steadily brighter. It was a truck, she realized, a big one. Its silhouette against the meager moonlight was monstrous, the kind of truck that swallows smaller cars whole. As it drew closer, she could make out the massive grille, reflecting her own dim taillights like glinting teeth. It was too close. The truck was right on her bumper, its engine a low growl that vibrated through her car's chassis. Tegan checked her speed. She was doing the limit, maybe even a little over. She glanced in her rearview mirror again, trying to make out the driver. All she could see was a shadowed figure, indistinct, menacing. Then, the truck's high beams flashed, once, twice. Tegan flinched, her eyes stinging. What was that for? Was she going too slow? She sped up slightly, trying to create some distance. The truck matched her speed, still glued to her bumper. She signaled, moving slightly to the right, inviting the truck to pass. It didn't. Instead, it flashed its high beams again, longer this time, bathing her entire car in a blinding white glare. A cold knot of fear began to tighten in her stomach. This wasn't normal. This wasn't an impatient driver. This felt deliberate. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe his brights were just stuck. Maybe he was trying to tell her something was wrong with her car, but her gut screamed otherwise. The truck continued to ride her bumper, its immense presence a suffocating weight behind her. Tegan's heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing her old Civic to its limits. The engine strained, a desperate mechanical cry in the silent night. The truck, effortlessly, kept pace. Then it happened. A jolt. Her car lurched forward. Tegan gasped, gripping the wheel. The truck had bumped her. Not a gentle nudge, but a deliberate, jarring impact. Her mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of possibilities. Road rage? A sick game? She was alone, miles from anywhere, and this giant machine was playing bumper cars with her life. The high beams flashed again, and this time the truck rammed her bumper with more force. The impact sent a shudder through her car, rattling her teeth. A small crack appeared in her rearview mirror. Tears pricked at her eyes, born of terror and frustration. She was trapped. Every instinct screamed at her to get away. But where? The road stretched ahead, an endless black ribbon. She considered pulling over, but the thought was instantly dismissed. No, she couldn't stop, not with this monstrous truck driver behind her. She imagined him, a hulking shadow stepping out of his cab, and a fresh wave of panic washed over her. The truck continued its terrifying game. Flash, then ram. Each impact was harder than the last. Her car groaned under the assault. She could hear the sickening crunch of metal, the protests of her aging vehicle. She tasted blood from biting her lips so hard. "What do you want?" she screamed, though her voice was swallowed by the roar of the wind and the truck's relentless engine. Suddenly, a sign, faintly illuminated in the distance. 24-hour gas station, next exit. Hope, a fragile, trembling thing, fluttered in her chest. A public place, lights, people. If she could just make it there. She flicked her turn signal and veered sharply off the highway, tires squealing in protest as she took the exit ramp. The truck, with surprising agility for its size, followed her, its high beams still blazing, a terrifying predator chasing its prey. The gas station parking lot was brightly lit, a beacon in the oppressive darkness. There were a few cars, thankfully, and the promise of a warm, well-lit interior. She slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt right at the front door of the gas station store. Without bothering to put the car in park, she fumbled with the door handle, flung it open, and stumbled out, half sobbing, half stumbling towards the sanctuary of the lighted store. Behind her, she heard the screech of tires as the truck also pulled into the parking lot, coming to a sudden, violent stop. She burst through the doors, gasping for breath, her eyes wide with terror. A lone attendant, a young man with a bored expression, looked up from a magazine behind the counter. "Call the police," Tegan choked out, clutching her chest, her voice hoarse with fear. "Please, he tried to kill me." The attendant, startled, slowly rose, his eyes widening as he looked past Tegan, out the glass door. Just then, the door swung open again. In walked the truck driver. He was massive, a giant of a man, with broad shoulders, a thick beard, and eyes that were shadowed under the brim of a faded baseball cap. He looked menacing, every inch the villain she had imagined. Tegan whimpered, shrinking back against a display of sugary snacks. "Stay away from me," she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. The truck driver ignored her, his gaze fixed on the attendant. His voice, when he spoke, was a deep rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the store. "Call the police," he bellowed, his voice filled with an urgency that stunned Tegan into silence. "And don't you dare let her go back to her car." Tegan stared, confused. "What are you talking about? You're the one who was ramming me. You're the one who needs to be arrested." The truck driver took a step towards her, and Tegan instinctively recoiled. But his face, as he finally looked at her, wasn't filled with malice. It was etched with a profound, bone-deep horror. "Ma'am," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle now, "you don't understand. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to warn you." He paused. Then his eyes darted nervously towards the window of her parked car, which was visible from inside the store. His voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "Every time I flashed my brights, every time I bumped your car." He swallowed hard, his gaze locking with hers, and in his eyes she reflected the unspeakable thing that had been riding along with her. "Because there was a man in your back seat."
Ben was 3 hours into a drive he already regretted. He was a Sydney boy, a city architect, heading up to a site meeting in Newcastle. To avoid the motorway traffic, he'd taken the old scenic route. He pulled into a dilapidated petrol station near Mooney Mooney. The air smelled of salt and damp earth. Inside, a wall-to-wall shelf of dusty meat pies and faded maps greeted him. The only other person there was a truckie, a man with skin like cracked leather and a high-vis vest that had seen better decades. The truckie was leaning over the counter, his CB radio crackling with static on his hip. A voice came through the white noise, frantic. "Stay clear of the 5-mile stretch. Just saw the white lady again. 3rd time tonight. She's out in force." The truckie looked at Ben, his eyes narrowing. "Heading north, mate?" "Yeah," Ben said, grabbing a lukewarm coffee. "Newcastle." "Keep your eyes on the white lines," the truckie warned, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "The boys on the radio were spooked. There's a girl out there tonight. Don't stop, not for anything." Ben chuckled, a bit of city arrogance bleeding through. "What, like a hitchhiker? I think I can handle a traveler." The truckie didn't smile. "She's not traveling, son. She's waiting. She's been waiting since 1974. If you see a flash of white, you put your foot down and you don't look in that rearview mirror. You hear me?" Ben nodded just to end the conversation. "Sure thing, mate. Thanks for the tip." 10 minutes later, the petrol station was a distant memory. The forest closed in. Ben's headlights cut weak yellow tunnels through the mist. Then, he saw her. She was standing just past a sharp bend, right on the edge of the gravel. Ben hit the brakes, his tires chirping. In the glare of his high beams, she looked like an apparition of beauty. She was wearing a vintage wedding dress, heavy silk, puffed sleeves. Her hair was a dark crown of curls, damp from the mist. He forgot the truckie's warning instantly. All he saw was a woman in distress. "Oh my God," he whispered, pulling over. He rolled down the window. The cold air that rushed in felt like ice water. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" She looked at him. Her skin was pale, almost translucent under the interior light of the car. Her eyes were a deep morning brown. She looked terrified, yet relieved. "I need to get to the church," she said. Her voice was thin, like paper tearing. "He's waiting. I'm so late." "Hop in," Ben said, leaning over to unlock the passenger door. "I'll get you to a phone or wherever you need to go. You're freezing." As she sat down, the smell hit him. It wasn't the smell of perfume or sweat. It was the smell of lilies, the kind you find at a funeral, mixed with the faint metallic scent of old blood. He glanced at her dress. It was torn at the hem, stained with mud. As they drove, Ben found himself mesmerized. She was stunning. There was an ethereal quality to her, a grace that felt out of place in his modern SUV. "I'm Ben," he said, trying to break the heavy silence. "I'm Catherine," she replied. She kept looking out the side window, her fingers twisting a small white ribbon in her lap. "What happened back there, Catherine? Did your car break down? Was there an accident?" She turned to him then, and for a second, Ben felt a jolt of pure electricity. There was a crash, so much noise. The glass, it looked like diamonds in the air. "I just want to get to him. He's waiting at the altar. He'll think I left him." "We'll find him," Ben reassured her, reaching out to touch her hand. His hand passed through hers, or at least it felt that way. He hit the cold leather of the seat instead. He shivered, chalking it up to the air conditioning. "The road is dangerous tonight. People don't see what's right in front of them." "A truckie warned me about this road," Ben said, trying to lighten the mood. "He told me some ghost story about a bride. Can you believe that? People and their legends." Catherine didn't laugh. She just stared ahead at the winding road. "It's not a legend when you're the one left behind." The road began to climb. The mist grew so thick that Ben could barely see 5 feet in front of the hood. "Is the turnoff coming up? Catherine?" No answer. "Catherine?" He turned his head. The passenger seat was empty. Ben slammed on the brakes, his tires chirping across the damp road. Hard hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, he stared at the seat. The seatbelt was still clicked in. The indentation in the leather was still there, slowly rising back to its original shape. On the seat sat a single white silk ribbon. It was damp and smelled of lilies. "No, no, no," Ben gasped, throwing the car into park and leaping out into the darkness, screaming her name. "Catherine! Catherine!" The forest only offered the sound of dripping leaves in response. He ran around the car, looking under the chassis, checking the bushland. There was no way she could have jumped out while he was driving 60 kilometers an hour. He sat back in the driver's seat, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the wheel. He looked at the white ribbon. He picked it up. It was stained with a single, fresh drop of bright red blood. Ben drove the remaining 20 minutes in a state of sheer vibrating shock. His mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe she jumped, maybe he'd hallucinated the whole thing, but the ribbon was still there, draped over his gear stick, cold and damp. He saw the neon glow of a 24-hour diner ahead. He pulled in, stumbling through the glass doors. The bell chimed, sounding like a funeral knell in the quiet room. An older waitress with a kind, tired face looked up from the counter. She saw Ben's pale face and the way his knees were buckling. "Easy there, love. You look like you've been through the ringer. What happened? Hit a kangaroo?" Ben couldn't speak. He just held out the white silk ribbon. The waitress's expression shifted instantly. The warmth drained from her face, replaced with a weary, haunting recognition. She didn't touch the ribbon. She stepped back. "You picked her up, didn't you?" she whispered. "The girl in the white dress?" "Catherine," Ben choked out. "She was right there. We were talking, and then she was gone. I don't understand. Who is she?" The waitress poured a cup of tea, her hands steady but her eyes sad. Her name was Catherine Rose. It was 1974, a Saturday night just like this one. She was running late for her own wedding at the chapel up on the ridge. She was driving too fast on those old tires. A timber truck came around the bend, and, well, she never made it to the altar. Ben shook his head. "That's impossible. She was in my car. I felt her weight in the seat. I smelled her perfume." The waitress leaned over the counter, her voice dropping to a hush. "Everyone around here has a story, Ben, but you're lucky. She usually only shows up for a few seconds. If she stayed long enough to talk to you, it means she thought you were him. She thought you were her groom." Ben felt a chill crawl up his spine. "But why? Why does she keep coming back?" "Because she's looking for something." She pointed to a framed photograph on the wall behind the register, a yellowed newspaper clipping from the 70s showing the wreckage of a car. Ben stood up and walked toward the photo, his breath hitched. In the photo, a young woman was smiling. It was her, Catherine, but it wasn't the face that stopped his heart. It was the caption below. "Tragedy at Mooney Mooney, bride-to-be killed. Search continues for the missing wedding ring believed to have been lost in the impact." Ben slowly reached into his pocket. He felt something hard and cold that hadn't been there before. He pulled it out. Lying in his palm was a gold wedding band, caked in 50 years of dirt and dried blood. "She didn't want a lift, Ben," the waitress whispered, looking at the ring in Ben's hand. "She wanted you to find what she lost, but they say once you find it, you're part of the story now." Ben looked at the ring, then back at the dark highway through the diner window. Out in the mist, standing just beyond the edge of the parking lot light, he saw a flash of white. She was waiting, and this time, she wasn't alone. At 2:14 a.m., Hank pulled a hand from the steering wheel and rubbed it vigorously across his face, trying to burn the exhaustion out of his skin. He'd been hauling a load of industrial steel from Chicago toward the coast for 14 hours, and the Nebraska plains were beginning to turn into a featureless black ocean. The hum of the massive diesel engine was no longer a sound, it was a vibration that lived inside his bones, a lullaby designed to kill. He knew he should pull over. His eyes were doing that thing, that dangerous thing where the white lines of the highway began to unspool like ribbons of silk, swaying back and forth in a wind that didn't exist. He called it white line fever, and it was the first stage of the end. Hank gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles turned the color of bone. "You're seeing things, Hank," he whispered to the empty cab. "Just the sleep deprivation talking. 10 more miles to the rest stop, just 10. But the road began to feel different. The air in the cab grew cold, the kind of cold that feels like a physical weight on your lungs. Every time he glanced at the side mirror, he felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, as if something was leaning over his shoulder, watching the road with him. The highway began to wind through a series of low, rolling hills. The moonlight was swallowed by a thick, sudden fog that rolled off the fields like a heavy shroud. Hank slowed to 50, then 40. The world outside his windshield narrowed to a 20-foot circle of gray mist. That's when he saw the dog again. It wasn't in the mirror this time. It was standing on the shoulder of the road, a silhouette so black it seemed to cut a hole in the fog. It was massive, the size of a small pony, with ears that stood like jagged peaks. As the truck's lights swept over it, the creature didn't flinch. It just turned its head, those red eyes locking onto Hank's. Hank slammed on the brakes, the steel load behind him groaning in protest. The tires screeched, smoking against the pavement as the massive rig drifted toward the shoulder. He came to a shuddering halt, the engine idling with a heavy, rhythmic throb. Silence rushed into the cab. Hank sat there, his chest heaving. He reached out the passenger window. The creature was gone. The fog pressed against the glass, thick and suffocating. He checked his gauges. Everything was normal. Oil pressure fine, temp fine. "Get it together," he hissed. He reached for his CB radio to see if any other drivers were seeing this mist, but as he keyed the mic, all that came through was a sound like a low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of rhythmic breathing. Not static, breathing. He dropped the mic as if it were red hot. The suspense began to coil in his gut like a snake. Hank realized he couldn't stay parked here. He was a sitting duck in this fog. He shifted back into gear and began to roll, his eyes darting from the road to the mirrors every 3 seconds. He was 5 miles from the rest stop when the hallucinations, if that's what they were, became impossible to ignore. The black dog appeared again, but this time it was in the middle of the road. It wasn't standing still, it was running. It stayed exactly 20 feet in front of his bumper, its paws making no sound on the asphalt. It looked back at him, its jaw open in a silent snarl, its eyes glowing brighter with every passing second. "Get out of the way!" Hank yelled, honking the air horn. The blast shattered the silence of the plains, but the dog didn't move. It began to weave. It moved to the left, then to the right, almost as if it were trying to block him from passing. Hank tried to accelerate to get around it, but as he did, the dog leapt onto the hood of the truck. Hank screamed, slamming his back against the seat. The creature was right there, separated from him only by the glass of the windshield. Up close, it didn't look like a dog at all. It looked like an ancient weathered statue brought to life, muscles like corded iron, fur that looked like scorched earth. It didn't have a nose or a mouth in a traditional sense. It was just a void of darkness, ending in those 2 burning red embers. The creature didn't attack. It didn't crack the glass. It simply sat there, staring at Hank, and then it raised a paw and slammed it down on the glass directly in front of Hank's face. The sound wasn't a thud. It was a word. It echoed inside Hank's skull, vibrating through his teeth. "Stop!" Hank didn't think. He didn't rationalize. He stood on the brake pedal with every ounce of strength he had. The trailer jackknifed slightly, the screech of metal and rubber filling the night like a dying scream. The truck slid sideways, tilting precariously before slamming back down and coming to a dead stop, angled across both lanes of the highway. Hank sat in the darkness, the engine having stalled out. His hands were shaking so violently he couldn't even unbuckle his seatbelt. The dog was gone. The hood was empty. He sat there for a long minute, the silence of the Nebraska night returning. He felt like a fool. He'd almost flipped a $100,000 rig because of a shadow and a tired mind. He reached for his ignition to restart the engine, his heart rate finally beginning to slow. Stupid. Just a dog. Just a dream. But then, the fog ahead of him shifted. The wind picked up, tearing a hole in the mist just a few yards in front of his grill. Hank's hand froze on the key. In the sudden clarity of the moonlight, he saw it. The bridge. The bridge over the Platte River was gone. A massive section of the concrete span had collapsed into the churning, flooded waters below, likely minutes before he arrived. The gap was total. There were no orange cones, no flares, no warning lights. If Hank had continued at even 30 miles per hour, the weight of the steel load would have carried him straight into the abyss. He would have been dead before he even hit the water. Hank stared at the empty space where the road should have been. His headlights caught the jagged rebar sticking out of the broken concrete like broken teeth. He looked down at his dashboard. There, on the clean, dusty surface of the hood, visible through the windshield, was a single, massive paw print. It wasn't of mud or dirt, it was a singe mark burned into the metal. Hank didn't try to start the truck again. Instead, he reached into his glove box and pulled out a small, old photograph of his father, who had been a long-haul driver for 40 years before him. He remembered his father telling him a story when he was a boy, a story about the black dog that appeared to drivers when their time was up or when the road was about to claim them. "If you see the hound, Hank," his father had said, "don't fight it. It's the only friend a lonely man has at 3 a.m. Hank took a deep breath, the cold air finally feeling sweet in his lungs. He reached over, turned off his headlights, and leaned his head back against the seat. For the first time in 14 hours, he wasn't tired anymore. He felt a strange, profound sense of peace. Out in the distance, past the broken bridge, a single mournful howl echoed across the plains. It wasn't a sound of hunger or anger. It was a goodbye. Hank closed his eyes and waited for the morning sun to find him, safe and still, on the side of the road.